I've been to Canyonlands Island in the Sky many times, but there's much more to this huge national park. In October, I decided it was time to make my first real trip to Canyonlands Needles District. It's known for its rugged terrain and these towering slivers of sandstone that they call needles. We saw them when looking down from the Grand View. And of course, these needles give the area its name. It only has about 10 miles of paved road, but there are many more 4x4 trails. And there's also quite a few hiking trails here. And the weather in the fall is very good for hiking. The Needles District is about an hour and a half south of Moab. The last 34 miles are on the surprisingly scenic Highway 211, where a sign reminds us that the Needles are pretty much surrounded by Bears Ears National Monument, which here is pretty flat. But a few miles later, it's much more interesting. And the fall color is a nice complement to the sandstone canyons. Before we even get to the Needles, there's a sign for newspaper rock petroglyphs, so I just had to pull over. Newspaper rock is a popular name for sites like this. There's another one in Petrified Forest National Park. But here, the glyphs are a lot closer. The sign tells us that the area was populated for thousands of years, until about the 1300s. And during all of that time, the ancestral Pueblo used rocks to chip away at the dark desert varnish on the rock face. And through the ages, every culture that came through here left their mark. Some were clearly hunters of deer and bighorn. And there's also proof that the area wasn't totally abandoned after 1300, because some of the figures are on horses, which didn't get here until the Spanish came in the 1500s. There are also lots of footprints. They think at least some of these have been made more recently by the Navajo, because several of the feet have 6 toes. Tradition holds that this was a status symbol. And archaeologists, and well, there's no real easy way to say this, but they've dug up thousands of grave sites in the Four Corners, and they found that over 3% of the bodies they dug up had 6 toes. And the local traditions say that a person with 6 toes had some sort of an elite status. If you know more, please leave a comment. When the Europeans came through, they left their mark too. Of course, today, that is very illegal. So look, but don't touch. There's still about 12 miles of scenic road to the park gate. And even on an overcast day, the drive alone is worth the trip. If you want to get away from the crowds in Moab, this is a great place to do it, especially if you want to do a little rock climbing. The main gate to the park wasn't even manned. The visitor center is just a further mile up the road. It's typical for an off-grid site. Water is available, but there is no food, lodging, or gas. Of course, there's things to buy, including refrigerator magnets. There's a giant 3D map of the whole area, which is really quite interesting, and a little museum/education area. It has displays of the area's vegetation, the Native Americans who lived here, as well as the pioneering cowboys. Though I'm more interested in the area's early history and how people survived in this harsh climate for thousands of years. This area is rich in Native American artifacts and dwelling sites. And if you're in the backcountry and you happen to find one, they want you to turn off your GPS location system before you take a picture of them with your phone, because they want to protect the sites, but also because they want to give as many people as possible the joy of discovery. And I gotta say, there's something I really like about that. There's also a nice shot of the confluence of the Green and Colorado rivers. I was hoping to see it in person, but I would soon learn that it was not to be on this trip. I also found this pothole display intriguing, and I was about to learn much more about them. With my appetite whetted, it was time to ask the ranger to help me plan my day. I first asked how I could see the confluence. He said I could drive there, but only if I had a 4x4 with a low-range gear. And I don't. But I knew there were lots of trails here, and it turns out there is one to the confluence. But it's 11 miles long. I didn't have the time for that. So he pulled out a park paper and highlighted a few shorter trails on its map. One was very close to the visitor center. The map calls it Stone Storehouse, but the trailhead sign calls it Roadside Ruin, and I wasn't really sure if I was in the right place until I grabbed one of the pamphlets from this box. It's just a half-mile round trip. Isn't really long enough to call it a hike, but it's not paved, so it does feel a bit like one. So I was in the right spot, and yes, I did put $1 in the slot to pay for the pamphlet. It says around 950 AD, people started migrating here from the Mesa Verde area, and yes, I've been there. It also says that another people from the Fremont area came here at about the same time. And please leave a comment if you know where that is. And remember that this was before the Spanish reintroduced horses to the area, so they had to walk the whole way on this very harsh and rocky and cactus-filled ground. Both groups were farmers, and they found enough edible plants, water, and arable land near what we now call the Salt Creek to sustain themselves. According to the pamphlet, this is Indian rice grass. Its seeds have a lot of nutrition, and apparently they were ground into a flour-like paste before they were consumed. And this green stuff on the left, it's called peppergrass. As you might expect, its seeds have a peppery taste, and apparently the Navajo used it for medicinal purposes. Several types of sagebrush are found in the area. This one was used to make a yellow dye, and its bark can be twisted into a weak twine. This is Fremont barberry. Its roots make a bright yellow dye, and it produces edible berries. Somehow I missed marker 5, but it's for saltbrush. They ate its seeds and apparently used the ashes to make baking powder, though it doesn't describe how they did that. As the vegetation gets bigger, the trail is getting windier. And that handrail, it's a hint that we're close to our destination. That's it?
It's right there. It's right up there. It's interesting. Wow.
Soon we're at the cross-bedded sandstone rock face. And when we follow it to the left, we see a small stone storage structure that's protected by a natural alcove. Back in the day, these little granaries were used to store seeds, corn, and other food stuff. But some of them instead were used to store intricate ceremonial items that only the elites were allowed to have. They like to build these structures under natural alcoves to protect them from the elements. And some were built in hidden places that are difficult to reach, because some folks like to take things that don't belong to them. To get into this one, the roof has small rectangular doors that they covered with a heavy slab of rock to help keep others out. And no, you can't climb on them. They don't want you to even touch them. Before we head back, I want to take one more look at this rock. If you look close, you can see that it's cross-bedded. This indicates that the area was once covered by giant wind-blown sand dunes. You can even tell what direction the wind was blowing. That can tell us something about seasonal climate changes a long, long time ago. The pamphlet has a few more tidbits to pass along as we head back. This is marker number 7. It's a narrow-leaf yucca. In Big Bend National Park, I saw a demo of how its sharp spines were used as sewing needles, and how its leaf fibers can be woven into cloth or a strong rope. This is prickly pear cactus. It doesn't exactly look like a food source, but believe it or not, it produces a edible, juicy fruit at certain times of year. And the pads can be eaten once you burn off all the tines. And once you scrape off the skin, the little juices inside can actually be used to soothe wounds. You gotta wonder who the first person was who thought of that one. So as we walk back, you may be wondering why the ancestral Pueblo left this area. They were here for 250 years. There was a good life here. By the early 1200s, the local climate in this area was quite a bit different than it was in the 950s. Nature somehow created droughts and temperature changes that made farming and plant growth less productive. People had to adapt. Some moved south to what is now New Mexico and Arizona. They joined local groups, and others fleeing other areas with similar problems. These people would eventually become the Hopi and Zuni tribes. Others stayed and adapted to the colder climate by relying on wild plant gathering and hunting. Those groups would become the Ute and Paiute tribes. And I hope I'm pronouncing all of these things correctly. But other tribes people say that their people never left. They say that the spirits of their ancestors are still here. With only 10 miles of paved road, it's hard to get lost in the Needles, and the map they give you is a nice little guide to all the pullouts along the way. It would have been nice if it was sunny, but even on this cloudy, dreary day, the drive is pretty nice. When I saw this little sign for Wooden Shoe Arch, well, I had to pull over and see what this was about. And it certainly wasn't crowded. I had to look for the arch. It's rather far away. It's a small one, but that does look like a big wooden shoe. As far as I could tell, there was no trail up to it. Apparently this is as close as you should get. I was a little disappointed that it was cloudy and rainy, and the park can't really look its best in weather conditions like this. But the views were still nice from the road, and it was a pleasant drive. And the drive to the end of the road is pretty nice. There's something interesting to see in every direction. The next place the ranger told me about was called the Pothole Trail. It's another short one. I recorded the whole out and back trip in 17 minutes with my Instagram VR camera. But don't worry, I'm not going to show you that whole thing. But I will try to explain what a pothole is and why they're so special. It turns out all these little depressions in the sandstone, well, they're little ecosystems that lay dormant in these small little sandstone depressions, at least when they're dry. But when the rains come and fill the potholes, they teem with life. With the skies threatening, I was hoping to witness that transformation. I suppose I could try to explain how this happens, but the Park Service made a video that explains it all. And since it's in the public domain, I'm not going to reinvent the wheel.
I'm talking about these desert potholes that some people call ephemeral pools. They can be found all over the park, wherever the rock surface is more or less level. And when they're dry, they're pretty unremarkable. You might see some dirt, a few seedlings, not much else. But when a good rain comes to fill this up with water, you'll find a tiny ecosystem filled with a surprising collection of animals. Let's take a look. Most people don't think of seafood when they visit Canyonlands, but potholes can actually contain several types of shrimp, including clam, fairy, and tadpole shrimp. Tadpole shrimp look like miniature horseshoe crabs and are actually living fossils. Some species of tadpole shrimp haven't changed in appearance for over 200 million years, making them the oldest living animal we know about. Other pothole dwellers include snails, mites, rotifers, worms, and tardigrades. Tardigrades, also called water bears or moss piglets, are cute, feisty little creatures. They're about 0.5 millimeter long, so you really need a microscope to see them. The tardigrades live all over the world, any place there's water, on moss, in lakes or ponds, and in desert potholes. Now, when the pothole's nice and full, tardigrades swim around happy as can be. When the sun comes out and the water starts to evaporate, tardigrades get ready for an amazing change. They secrete wax out of the armored plating across their backs and start to lose moisture. They can actually lose 99% of their body's moisture and slow their metabolism down to 1/10% of normal, entering an extreme hibernation-like state. When they're in this state, surrounded by a little waxy cyst called a tun, tardigrades can survive incredible climate change. Scientists have studied them in labs. They've heated them to 300 degrees Fahrenheit and frozen them to -300 degrees Fahrenheit, and nothing happens. I've heard they can even survive 1,000 times the radiation that would kill a human being, but nothing happens. They don't experience tissue damage when they're in that tun. All they're doing is waiting for the rain. It might take 1 storm or 2 or 3 to fill the pothole back up, but once it's full, the tardigrades respond pretty quickly. In about 4 hours, they're swimming around again, happy as can be. Not all pothole critters are as resilient. In fact, most survive just long enough to reproduce and lay their eggs before the pothole dries up. As you might imagine, long-term changes in temperature and precipitation can dramatically affect potholes. Scientists think they might give us clues about the biological impacts of climate change, so they've been monitoring them here at Canyonlands for some time now. Potholes are also very sensitive to human impacts, so when you visit the park, don't stick your finger in the wet pothole or your foot in the dry one. Just walk around them. And when you do, think a moment about the life that's waiting there at the bottom for the next big rain. I'm Karen Hanker. Thanks for joining me on Inside Canyonlands.
I gotta say, the videos made by Canyonlands are better than just about any other by the National Park Service. I stay on the path to avoid hurting the cryptobiotic soil before reaching the next sandstone area, where there's some interesting rocks, at least from a geologic point of view. The two different colors of sandstone tell us that something changed here a long time ago. If you're a geologist, please write a comment and let us know what you think that change was. There's more potholes to the right, but I stayed to the left to avoid them. On this trail there are hundreds of these little ecosystems. The trick is to avoid stepping in them. Many are filled with sand and don't look that impressive at all, and you can't imagine that there's a little world in there. One thing I can't help but notice is the almost complete lack of noise. There's little wind, and my footsteps and clogged sinuses are about the only sounds I can hear. I just might have to add this place to my list of places with the sound of silence. And that's a rare commodity if you live in a big city like I do. It looks like the trail goes up this way. It's much more of the same, but with a view that stretches to the horizon. I wander around a bit. And then I decide to climb this little rock pile to get a full 360-degree view. And interestingly, there's even tiny potholes up here. And I guess now I'm high enough to get into the wind. And sorry about the weird waves you see in the video. They're caused by a stitching error with my 360 VR camera, and I can't really do anything about it now. It's been a while since I've just gone exploring, and I gotta say, it's fun. You never know what you're going to find. And since those are some big rocks, I decided to head that way. Well, it looks like I'm not the only one who likes to do a little exploring. That was a fun little passage, with a great geologic story, I'm sure. I wish I knew more about the rocks. Is that a midden? It looks a little bit like an ancient midden, which is ancient animal waste. But it also looks like mud or other water-transported debris. But if that's true, how would it get here?
What are you doing?
I'm shooting some video with a 360. She asked a good question. I'm not sure I knew the answer. That way looks sort of interesting. So I decided to go on over and see what was there. Took a bit of a scramble, but what I found was a hidden water-carved canyon. I guess we know now that that wasn't a midden, it was in fact waterborne debris. And the water must have been awfully high to deposit mud way up there. Places like this are nice little surprises. It makes the whole trip worthwhile. And I tried to get a little closer to the edge, but that ledge down there, it's lower and farther away than it looks. I decided it was time to head back. A few sprinkles were hitting the lens. But because there was no real trail, I just headed in what I thought was the correct direction. It looks remarkably different when you're going the other way, which is a good thing. But then I recognized the gap in the rocks, and I knew I was going the right way. For a short trail that mostly isn't a trail, it's a pretty interesting way to spend 20 minutes. The potholes, they're interesting. At least they are when you know what they are. And I wish it would have poured down rain so I could have seen the transformation of those tiny little life forms, because it was fun poking around the big rocks, and really fun exploring and finding that small hidden canyon. There aren't too many things that are bad about traveling in the fall, but one of them is that the days are shorter. It looks like this was going to be my last adventure in the Needles on this trip, and I really wish I had more time. The ranger highlighted another trail at the end of the road, the Slick Rock Trail. It's only 2.4 miles long, but I had a long drive ahead of me, and I didn't have a place to stay for the night, and the rooms in Moab were all booked. So I really needed to think about heading back.